deep beneath the endless dunes of the Sahara Desert, where the sand shifts like ocean waves frozen in time, something extraordinary waits in absolute darkness. For decades, archaeologists dismissed the stories as folklore, desert mirages born from heat and desperation. But in 2019, ground-penetrating radar revealed what local Tuareg tribes had whispered about for centuries: the unmistakable signature of massive stone structures buried beneath hundreds of feet of sand. This isn't just another lost settlement. The electromagnetic imaging shows a city larger than ancient Rome, with architectural patterns that don't match any known civilization. Streets laid out in perfect geometric grids, monumental buildings arranged according to astronomical alignments, water channels that would have required engineering knowledge supposedly unknown to ancient African civilizations, and at the center of it all, a structure so massive that some researchers refuse to believe the data. Tonight, we're diving deep into one of archaeology's most explosive discoveries, a find so significant that 3 separate governments have classified the research. A discovery that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about human civilization. Because what lies beneath the Sahara isn't just another ancient city, it's evidence of something far older, far more advanced, and far more mysterious than anything in our history books. The story begins not with scientists or satellites, but with an old man named Amalal, whose weathered hands traced patterns in the sand as he spoke to a French archaeologist in 1987. His great-grandfather had told him stories of the buried palaces, of stone towers that once reached toward the sky, of a people who could make water flow upward and light burn without flame. The archaeologist nodded politely, filed the interview away, and forgot about it completely. But Amalal's stories weren't unique. Across the Sahara, from Morocco to Chad, similar legends persist among nomadic tribes. They speak of the Tamashek, the vanished ones, who built cities of white stone and commanded the desert winds. In Mali, griots sing of the kingdom beneath the sand, ruled by kings who wore crowns of fallen stars. In Algeria, Berber elders describe ruins that appear only during sandstorms, glowing with an inner light before vanishing again. For over a century, Western archaeologists ignored these accounts entirely. The Sahara was considered a barrier, not a birthplace of civilization. The narrative was simple. Advanced cultures emerged in Mesopotamia and Egypt, spread through the Mediterranean, and that was it. Sub-Saharan Africa remained primitive until European contact. Any suggestion otherwise was dismissed as romantic nonsense. That dismissal became harder to maintain when satellite imagery began revealing anomalies across the Sahara. Geometric patterns visible only from space, straight lines cutting across hundreds of miles of desert, circular formations too perfect to be natural. By the 1992nd, NASA's Landsat program had identified over 300 potential archaeological sites buried beneath the sand. But it was the work of Dr. Sarah Chen, a geophysicist at MIT, that changed everything. In 2018, her team deployed a new generation of ground-penetrating radar across a site in southern Algeria known to locals as Akel en Iguinor, the land of giants. What they found defied explanation. The radar signatures showed structures extending over 40 square kilometers. Not scattered ruins, but a complete urban complex with clear districts, major thoroughfares, and what appeared to be a sophisticated water management system. The buildings weren't randomly placed, but followed a precise mathematical pattern based on the golden ratio. The main avenue was oriented exactly toward the constellation Orion as it would have appeared 8,000 years ago. 8,000 years ago. That date alone should have sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. It would make this city contemporary with Çatalhöyük in Turkey and older than Stonehenge. But the Sahara 8 millennia ago wasn't the hostile wasteland we see today. It was a green savanna crossed by rivers and dotted with lakes. The climate was more like modern-day Kenya, perfect for supporting large populations. Dr. Chen's team knew they were looking at something unprecedented. But when they submitted their findings for publication, they encountered resistance that bordered on hostility. Journal editors questioned their methodology. Peer reviewers demanded additional evidence that would require excavations no government was willing to fund. Senior archaeologists suggested they were seeing patterns that weren't really there, that the human mind naturally creates order from chaos. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In late 2019, a mining company conducting surveys for rare earth deposits accidentally drilled through what they thought was bedrock. Instead, their equipment broke through into an empty space. The drill cores brought up fragments of worked stone, pieces of what appeared to be glass or ceramic, and something else that made everyone involved very nervous. Metal artifacts that shouldn't exist in a pre-Bronze Age context. The mining company immediately sealed the borehole and contacted the Algerian government. Within 48 hours, the site was declared a restricted archaeological zone. All personnel signed non-disclosure agreements. The drill cores were transported to laboratories in Paris and Boston under conditions normally reserved for radioactive materials. What happened next depends on who you ask. Official reports describe routine analysis of ancient artifacts. Unofficial sources tell a very different story. They speak of materials that couldn't be identified using standard techniques, of metal alloys that seemed to defy conventional metallurgy, of organic compounds preserved in ways that challenged everything we know about decomposition in arid environments. Dr. Marcus Webb, a materials scientist at Cambridge, who claimed to have examined some of the samples, described them as technologically impossible. The metals showed signs of advanced processing techniques, including what appeared to be controlled crystalline structures. The ceramic fragments contained microscopic patterns that looked almost like circuitry. Most disturbing of all were the organic materials, which carbon dating placed at over 7,000 years old, but showed no signs of decay. Webb's claims were quickly discredited by his own university. His tenure was revoked, his research funding withdrawn. He now works as a consultant for private collectors, his reputation in academic circles destroyed. But his detailed notes, leaked online in 2020, provide a glimpse into what might have been found beneath the Sahara. According to Webb's documentation, the artifacts suggested a level of technological sophistication that shouldn't have existed anywhere on Earth 7,000 years ago. The metalwork required temperatures achievable only with advanced furnaces. The ceramics showed evidence of controlled atmospheric processing. Most intriguingly, several items appeared to be components of larger devices, precision-engineered parts that served unknown functions. The implications were staggering. If authentic, these artifacts would prove that an advanced civilization had flourished in the Sahara millennia before the rise of Mesopotamia or Egypt. A civilization that had mastered metallurgy, ceramics, and possibly technologies we still don't fully understand. A civilization that had been completely erased from the historical record. But that erasure might not have been accidental. As researchers began connecting the scattered clues, a disturbing pattern emerged. The Sahara hadn't gradually transformed from grassland to desert over thousands of years, as previously believed. Climate data suggested the change had been rapid, perhaps occurring within a few centuries around 5,000 years ago. Something had turned a thriving ecosystem into an uninhabitable wasteland, burying any trace of the civilizations that once flourished there. The question that haunted researchers wasn't just what had existed beneath the sand. It was what had happened to destroy it so completely that even legends barely survived. Natural climate change, catastrophic events, or something else entirely. As Dr. Chen's team prepared for a more extensive survey in 2020, they received an unexpected communication, a message claiming to be from descendants of the original inhabitants, people who had preserved knowledge of the buried city through oral tradition spanning 70 centuries. The message contained detailed maps of the underground complex, descriptions of the major structures, and a warning: some doors should remain closed. The sender identified themselves only as the keepers of the deep memory, guardians of secrets too dangerous for the modern world to handle. They claimed the buried city wasn't empty, that something still moved in the darkness beneath the sand. Something that had been sleeping for millennia, but was beginning to stir as the desert above grew hotter and the water table shifted. Most researchers dismissed the message as an elaborate hoax, but when they compared the provided maps with their radar data, the correlation was unsettling. The anonymous sender knew details about the underground complex that hadn't been published anywhere. They described chambers the survey teams hadn't even discovered yet, passages that connected different sections of the city, and most disturbing of all, areas where their equipment consistently malfunctioned. Dr. Chen found herself facing an impossible choice: pursue the greatest archaeological discovery in human history, or heed warnings that might be protecting the world from something it wasn't ready to understand. The decision was ultimately taken out of her hands when the COVID pandemic shut down international research projects worldwide. But the mystery didn't disappear with the travel restrictions. If anything, the forced pause allowed researchers to analyze their existing data more thoroughly. What they found in those detailed examinations made some wish they'd never looked beneath the sand in the first place. The architectural patterns weren't just mathematically precise. They followed principles that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Renaissance. The city's layout incorporated advanced understanding of acoustics, with chambers designed to amplify or muffle sound in specific ways. Most intriguingly, the entire complex seemed to be oriented not just towards celestial bodies, but towards something else entirely, something that required knowledge of the Earth's magnetic field and its fluctuations over geological time. As teams of researchers worked remotely, sharing data through encrypted channels, they began to realize they weren't just looking at an ancient city. They were looking at something that challenged fundamental assumptions about human development, about the progression of technology, about the very nature of civilization itself. And deep beneath the Sahara, something that had waited in darkness for 70 centuries began to respond to the attention focused on it from above. Seismic monitors detected vibrations that followed no natural pattern. Electromagnetic sensors registered anomalies that seemed to pulse with an almost organic rhythm. The sand, it seemed, was starting to remember what it had buried. And what it remembered might change everything we thought we knew about our past, our present, and the future we thought we were building. The question was no longer what lay beneath the Sahara. The question was whether humanity was prepared for the answer. The first indication that something had fundamentally changed came from an unlikely source, a routine geological survey conducted by the Algerian National Oil Company in March 2021. Their seismic equipment, designed to map underground petroleum deposits, began registering readings that made no scientific sense. Instead of the steady, predictable signatures of rock formations, they detected what their instruments described as hollow spaces filled with moving air, hundreds of feet beneath the desert floor, in chambers that had supposedly been sealed for millennia. The survey team initially assumed equipment malfunction, but when they brought in backup instruments, the readings remained consistent. Something was breathing beneath the Sahara. Air was flowing through passages that shouldn't exist, following patterns that suggested not random caverns but engineered ventilation systems still functioning after 7,000 years. Dr. Youssef Mansouri, the project's lead geologist, made a decision that would haunt him for months afterward. Instead of reporting the anomalies to his supervisors, he contacted Dr. Chen's team directly. Within hours, he was receiving encrypted files containing radar maps that perfectly matched his seismic data. The breathing spaces his equipment detected corresponded exactly to the buried city's main thoroughfares. What they discovered next defied every principle of archaeological preservation. The air flowing through those ancient passages wasn't stagnant or dead. Chemical analysis revealed it contained elevated levels of ozone and trace amounts of compounds that shouldn't exist in nature. The atmosphere down there was somehow being actively maintained, scrubbed clean by processes no one could identify. But the truly disturbing discovery came when they lowered sensitive microphones into the survey boreholes. In the absolute silence of the deep desert night, with recording equipment sensitive enough to detect a whisper from miles away, they heard something that made hardened geologists question their sanity. Footsteps. Distant, rhythmic, deliberate footsteps echoing through stone corridors that had supposedly been empty since the fall of the Roman Empire. The recordings were analyzed by acoustic specialists in 3 different countries. All reached the same impossible conclusion. The sounds were consistent with bipedal movement through enclosed spaces. Large bipedal movement, suggesting figures 7 to 8 feet tall, walking with purpose through the buried city's main avenues. Dr. Mansouri's team faced a choice that would define their careers and possibly their lives. Report their findings through official channels, knowing the site would immediately be classified and sealed, or pursue the investigation privately, risking everything for answers that might redefine human history. They chose the dangerous path. Working through intermediaries and using equipment borrowed from sympathetic colleagues, they began a covert investigation that would consume the next 18 months. What they uncovered piece by piece, reading by reading, was evidence of something that challenged not just archaeology, but the fundamental assumptions of modern science. The buried city wasn't just preserved, it was active. Temperature readings showed climate-controlled zones maintaining steady conditions regardless of the desert heat above. Electromagnetic sensors detected power sources operating at levels that suggested technology far more advanced than anything achieved by ancient civilizations. Most unnervingly, their equipment consistently detected movement patterns, suggesting a population of several hundred individuals living and working in the buried complex. The implications were staggering. Either they had discovered the greatest archaeological hoax in history, or something had survived beneath the Sahara for 7 millennia. Something that had maintained its technology, its society, and its secrecy, while the world above forgot it ever existed. The breakthrough that transformed speculation into undeniable fact came from an unexpected source. In November 2022, construction workers building a new highway across southern Algeria broke through what they assumed was a thin layer of sandstone. Instead, their equipment plunged into empty space, creating an opening large enough for a person to enter. The construction foreman, a practical man named Hassan Belkaid, made what he later described as the most terrifying mistake of his life. Instead of immediately reporting the breach to authorities, curiosity compelled him to investigate. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a rope, he descended into the darkness beneath the desert floor. What he found in those first few minutes of exploration would change everything. The opening led to a perfectly preserved stone corridor, its walls covered with symbols that seemed to shift and move in the beam of his flashlight. The air was surprisingly fresh, carrying scents of water and growing things that shouldn't exist hundreds of feet beneath the Sahara. Most disturbing of all, the passage showed clear signs of recent use. The stone floors were worn smooth by countless footsteps, and oil lamps mounted in wall niches still flickered with flames that cast no smoke. Belkaid managed to record 17 minutes of footage on his smartphone before panic drove him back to the surface. Those 17 minutes of shaky, poorly lit video would become the most analyzed archaeological evidence in modern history. The footage showed corridor after corridor of worked stone, architectural styles that didn't match any known civilization, hieroglyphs that resembled Egyptian writing but followed patterns no linguist could decipher, chambers filled with what appeared to be machinery, devices of unknown purpose crafted from metals that gleamed like they had been polished yesterday, and in the final seconds of recording, just before Belkaid fled in terror, the camera captured something that made viewers question their sanity. A tall figure in flowing robes, standing motionless at the far end of a corridor, watching, waiting. The figure's face was hidden in shadow, but its proportions suggested something not quite human. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at angles that made observers uncomfortable. The figure raised one impossibly long arm in what might have been a greeting or a warning, and then stepped backward into darkness, so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. Belcade sealed the opening with concrete and steel, filed a report claiming minor foundation damage, and never spoke publicly about what he had seen. But the video had already been uploaded to encrypted servers, shared with researchers who had spent years searching for proof of what lay beneath the sand. Within days, the footage was being analyzed by experts in linguistics, archaeology, and digital forensics. The stonework was authenticated as ancient, the symbols confirmed as genuine writing though in no known language. Most significantly, the figure at the end of the corridor showed no signs of digital manipulation. Whatever Belcade had encountered down there, it had been real. The revelation that the buried city was inhabited forced researchers to confront possibilities they had never seriously considered. If people had survived beneath the Sahara for 7,000 years, they represented an unbroken link to humanity's deepest past. They might possess knowledge of advanced technologies, lost sciences, forgotten histories that could revolutionize human understanding, but they might also represent something else entirely, something that had good reason to remain hidden from the world above, something that had watched civilizations rise and fall while maintaining its own secret existence beneath the sand. Dr. Chen's team found themselves facing an ethical dilemma that kept them awake at night. They had discovered what might be the greatest archaeological find in human history, but every piece of evidence suggested that discovery might be unwelcome. The inhabitants of the buried city had clearly chosen isolation, had maintained their secrecy for millennia. What right did surface dwellers have to disturb that isolation? The question became more pressing when seismic monitors began detecting increased activity beneath the desert. The rhythmic movements were becoming more frequent, more widespread. Something was stirring in the buried city, responding to the attention focused on it from above. Temperature readings showed zones of the complex warming beyond their normal ranges. Electromagnetic signatures suggested power systems coming online that had been dormant for centuries. Most ominously, the acoustic sensors were picking up new sounds from the depths, not just footsteps, but voices. Conversations conducted in languages that predated recorded history, discussing matters that made linguists who heard the translated fragments profoundly uneasy. The inhabitants of the buried city were not just aware of the surface world's interest in their domain. They were preparing for something, mobilizing resources that had lain unused for generations, making ready for possibilities that had been theoretical for 7,000 years. And as satellite imagery began detecting subtle changes in the desert surface above the buried complex, researchers realized that the question was no longer whether to make contact with what lay beneath the Sahara. The question was whether the inhabitants of the buried city were preparing to make contact with them. The evidence of preparation became undeniable when thermal imaging satellites detected the first heat signatures breaking through to the surface. Not random hotspots, but geometric patterns emerging from the sand in perfect alignment with the buried city's major structures. The temperature differentials suggested massive air shafts opening for the first time in millennia, ancient ventilation systems reactivating as if responding to some predetermined signal. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a thermal dynamics specialist working with the European Space Agency, was the first to notice the patterns weren't random. The heat signatures formed a complex mandala stretching across 40 kilometers of desert, each point precisely calculated to create what appeared to be a massive communication array. Something down there was sending a message to the stars. But the message wasn't being transmitted outward. It was calling something in. Radio telescopes across North Africa began detecting anomalous signals originating from the Sahara, frequencies that shouldn't exist in nature, broadcasting in mathematical sequences that suggested intelligence. The transmissions followed prime number progressions, then shifted to increasingly complex equations that pushed the boundaries of current mathematical understanding. Whatever was broadcasting from beneath the sand possessed knowledge of advanced mathematics that rivaled modern supercomputers. Dr. James Morrison, a cryptographer formerly with the NSA, spent 3 sleepless weeks analyzing the signal patterns. His conclusions, shared only with a select group of researchers, painted a picture that challenged everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. The mathematics weren't just advanced. They described physical principles that mainstream science had only theorized. Equations for manipulating gravitational fields, formulas for converting matter to energy with impossible efficiency, mathematical proofs for technologies that could reshape reality itself. Morrison's final report, classified immediately upon submission, contained a warning that would haunt everyone who read it. We are not dealing with a lost civilization. We are dealing with something that never left. The first surface manifestations appeared during the winter solstice of 2022. Nomadic tribes reported seeing lights beneath the sand, geometric patterns glowing with soft phosphorescence that pulsed in rhythm with the stars above. The lights followed the ancient caravan routes, as if something underground was tracing pathways used by travelers for thousands of years. Amara Awali, a Tuareg guide whose family had crossed the Sahara for 30 generations, described the phenomenon in terms that made researchers profoundly uncomfortable. The sand dreams, she told Dr. Chen during a clandestine meeting at a remote oasis. It dreams of the time before the burning, when the green world covered all the emptiness. The dreaming ones below remember every footstep, every word spoken above their heads. They have been listening, learning, waiting for the moment when the upper world would be ready to remember them. Her description of the dreaming ones matched details from Belcade's footage with unsettling accuracy. Tall figures moving through crystal-lit corridors, their faces hidden beneath hoods that seemed to contain more darkness than fabric should hold. Beings that walked like humans but cast shadows that moved independently, reaching toward hidden purposes with their own agenda. The Tuareg had names for them: Kel Essuf, the people of the empty places. According to oral traditions passed down through centuries, they were the original inhabitants of the Sahara, masters of the green world that existed before the Great Drying. When the climate changed and the grasslands became desert, they didn't flee or die. They went deeper, building cities in the living rock, waiting for the wheel of time to turn back toward abundance. But the traditions also carried warnings. The Kel Essuf weren't entirely human, not anymore. Millennia of life in the deep places had changed them, adapted them to existence without sunlight, without the cycles of surface weather. They had learned to draw sustenance from the earth itself, to speak with stones and command the underground waters. They had become something between human and elemental force, guardians of secrets too powerful for the surface world to safely possess. Dr. Chen found herself caught between scientific fascination and growing dread. Every piece of evidence pointed toward a discovery that would rewrite human history, but the implications grew more disturbing with each revelation. If the Kel Essuf truly possessed the technologies suggested by the signal intercepts, they wielded power that could transform or destroy modern civilization. Their reasons for maintaining secrecy for 7,000 years might not be about preservation, but about protection, protecting the surface world from knowledge it couldn't handle responsibly. The tipping point came when ground-penetrating radar detected new construction beneath the desert. Not ancient structures finely revealed by shifting sand, but active building projects expanding the buried city's infrastructure. Massive chambers being excavated, new passages connecting previously separate sections of the complex. Something down there was preparing for a population increase, for activities that required space and resources on a scale that suggested major operations. Seismic analysis revealed the construction methods defied conventional engineering. Instead of removing rock and sand, the builders appeared to be convincing the earth to reshape itself. Stone flowing like water to create perfectly smooth corridors. Sand compressed into building materials stronger than reinforced concrete. bedrock carved with precision that suggested technology beyond current human capabilities. The construction activity was centered around what appeared to be a massive vertical shaft, perfectly circular and extending down beyond the range of any surveying equipment. The shaft's purpose became clear when electromagnetic sensors detected power readings emanating from its depths that dwarfed nuclear reactors. Something at the bottom of that shaft was generating energy on a scale that could power entire cities. Dr. Morrison's team, working with increasingly sophisticated interception equipment, began detecting communications between the buried city and other locations across North Africa. The signals suggested the Sahara complex wasn't unique, but part of a network of underground installations connected by technology that made the internet look primitive. Instantaneous communication across thousands of miles, data transfers that implied quantum entanglement networks, coordination between sites that had remained hidden beneath the world's deserts for millennia. The revelation that humanity had been sharing the planet with an advanced civilization for the entirety of recorded history triggered responses that ranged from wonder to terror. Government agencies that had dismissed the initial reports as academic curiosity suddenly classified everything related to the Sahara discovery. Military satellites were quietly repositioned to maintain constant surveillance of the desert regions showing activity. Special operations teams began training for scenarios that officially didn't exist. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Archaeological sites across the world began reporting similar anomalies. Underground chambers detecting movement in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Seismic activity beneath Stonehenge, following mathematical patterns. Electromagnetic pulses originating from the depths below Machu Picchu. Whatever was awakening beneath the Sahara was coordinating with installations hidden beneath humanity's most sacred sites. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a seismologist monitoring the global pattern of activity, made a discovery that turned speculation into certainty. The underground installations weren't just communicating, they were synchronizing. Energy readings from sites around the world were beginning to pulse in perfect harmony, creating a planetary rhythm that resonated through the Earth's core. Something that had slept beneath human civilization for thousands of years was preparing to wake up. The synchronization wasn't random. Analysis of the pulse patterns revealed they were timed to astronomical events, aligned with planetary positions that occurred only once every 26,000 years. The hidden civilization wasn't just preparing for emergence. They were waiting for a cosmic alignment that would provide optimal conditions for whatever they planned to accomplish. As 2023 progressed, the signs of preparation became impossible to ignore. Surface temperatures above the buried installations began fluctuating in ways that suggested massive climate control systems coming online. Desert regions that had been lifeless for millennia showed traces of moisture, microscopic organisms, awakening from dormancy, as if responding to signals from below. The most disturbing development came from linguistic analysis of the intercepted communications. Dr. Sarah Kim, working with advanced translation algorithms, began decoding fragments of the underground conversations. The language was ancient but structured, containing root words that suggested connections to every human language family. But the content of those conversations made researchers question whether contact with the hidden civilization would be humanity's greatest discovery or its final mistake. The buried ones weren't just preparing to emerge. They were discussing the surface world's readiness, evaluating humanity's technological and spiritual development, deciding whether the species that had inherited the Earth deserved to learn the truth about their planet's deeper history. And from the fragments Dr. Kim managed to translate, the evaluation wasn't going in humanity's favor. The judgment protocols had been established long before the rise of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Every surface civilization that had developed beyond a certain technological threshold had been assessed by the guardians below. Some had been guided toward wisdom and allowed to flourish. Others had been found lacking and quietly redirected towards self-limitation or collapse. Humanity's assessment was entering its final phase. The question that haunted every researcher involved in the project was no longer what lay beneath the Sahara. The question was whether humanity would pass or fail the test it didn't even know it was taking. And if it failed, what the consequences might be for a species that had built its entire understanding of history on the assumption that it was alone. As monitoring equipment detected increasing activity in underground installations around the globe, one thing became clear. The age of humanity's solitary dominance over the Earth was ending. What would replace it depended on decisions being made in chambers buried beneath the sand, by minds that had watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations while maintaining their own eternal vigil. The surface world continued its daily routines, unaware that its future was being decided in the deep places where light had not touched for 7,000 years. But for those who knew what lay beneath, every sunrise carried the possibility that it might be among the last to illuminate a world where humans believed they were the only intelligence that mattered. The awakening had begun. The judgment was underway. And somewhere in the darkness beneath the Sahara, ancient eyes were watching, ancient minds were evaluating, ancient powers were preparing to reshape the world according to wisdom older than recorded time. The only question remaining was whether humanity was ready for the answer they had been seeking all along. The first sign that the evaluation had reached its critical phase came through channels no government was prepared to monitor. Children across North Africa began drawing the same images without any contact with each other. Perfectly geometric mandalas that matched the heat signatures appearing above the buried installations. 7-year-olds in Morocco sketching architectural plans for buildings that existed only in the deep places. 10-year-olds in Egypt writing symbols in sand that linguists recognized as fragments of the ancient language being transmitted from below. Dr. Amina Hassan, a child psychologist working in Cairo, documented over 300 cases in a 6-month period. The children described the same recurring dreams, tall figures in flowing robes standing at the edge of vast underground gardens, beckoning them toward doorways that opened onto chambers filled with impossible light. In their dreams, the figures spoke without words, sharing knowledge that felt older than memory itself. Most disturbing were the children who began demonstrating abilities they shouldn't possess. Mathematical concepts that wouldn't normally be grasped until university level. Intuitive understanding of engineering principles that allowed them to build structures with uncanny precision. 7-year-old Fatima al-Rashid constructed a working model of what appeared to be a water purification system using only clay and stones, creating a device that produced clean water with 99.7% efficiency, despite having no formal education in chemistry or physics. When questioned about where she learned to build such things, Fatima's response chilled everyone who heard it. "The tall ones showed me. They said the upper children need to learn before the doors open. They said some doors can't be closed once they're opened, so we have to be ready to help." The pattern wasn't limited to North Africa. Reports flooded in from archaeological sites worldwide where children living near ancient monuments were exhibiting similar phenomena. Young minds seemed uniquely receptive to whatever intelligence was reaching up from the buried installations, as if the guardians below understood that humanity's future lay with those too young to have developed fixed beliefs about what was possible. Dr. Chen's team found themselves monitoring a global awakening that extended far beyond their original discovery. The Sahara installation wasn't just one buried city, it was the primary node in a planetary network that had been dormant since the last ice age. As the cosmic alignment approached, installations that had remained hidden beneath Easter Island, the Amazon rainforest, the Himalayan peaks, and the Australian outback were all showing signs of synchronized activation. Satellite imagery revealed impossible structures emerging from locations that had been thoroughly surveyed by archaeologists for decades. Stone platforms rising from jungle floors with mathematical precision. Geometric patterns carved into mountain faces overnight, visible only from specific angles that created optical illusions of depth and movement. Desert regions where sand had been rearranged into massive spirals that generated their own weather patterns, creating microclimates in areas that had been lifeless for centuries. The most unnerving development came from deep ocean monitoring stations. Sonar equipment detected massive structures, rising from abyssal depths, architectural complexes that dwarfed anything ever built by surface civilizations. The constructions weren't random. They followed the same geometric principles found beneath the Sahara, suggesting the hidden civilization had mastered technologies that allowed them to build in environments no surface dweller had ever imagined possible. Dr. Robert Singh, an oceanographer studying the deep-sea phenomena, made a discovery that forced him to question everything he thought he knew about planetary history. The underwater installations weren't just rising. They were transforming the ocean chemistry around them. Dead zones that had been lifeless for decades suddenly teemed with bioluminescent organisms that followed mathematical patterns in their movements. Deep-sea creatures began exhibiting behaviors that suggested coordination, as if some intelligence was orchestrating marine ecosystems on a global scale. The transformation wasn't limited to remote locations. Urban centers built over ancient sites began experiencing anomalies that city planners couldn't explain. In Rome, underground chambers dating to before the Republic were detected beneath the Vatican, chambers that shouldn't exist according to geological surveys. In Jerusalem, construction projects kept uncovering perfectly preserved rooms that appeared on no historical map, filled with artifacts that predated known civilization by thousands of years. London's Thames began revealing structures beneath its muddy banks, stone foundations that followed the same architectural principles found in the Sahara complex. Paris discovered that its famous catacombs were merely the uppermost level of a vast underground network that extended far deeper than anyone had suspected. New York's subway system broke through into chambers that had been sealed since before the arrival of European colonists, chambers filled with symbols that matched the writing found beneath the desert sand. The pattern was unmistakable. Every major center of human civilization had been built on sites that were already significant to the hidden culture below. Humanity's greatest cities, its most sacred sites, its centers of learning and power, all existed because something beneath the surface had guided their placement with subtle influence, spanning millennia. Dr. Morrison's cryptographic team made a breakthrough that illuminated the scope of that influence. The mathematical sequences being transmitted from underground installations weren't just communication, they were historical records. Data streams that contained detailed accounts of surface civilizations dating back 50,000 years. Every major empire, every technological breakthrough, every cultural revolution had been observed and recorded by minds that existed beyond the reach of human history. The records revealed that humanity's development hadn't been natural evolution. It had been guided, shaped, occasionally redirected by interventions so subtle that surface dwellers had attributed them to luck, inspiration, or divine providence. The Renaissance hadn't been a spontaneous flowering of human creativity. It had been triggered by carefully placed artifacts that sparked innovation in key individuals. The Industrial Revolution hadn't emerged from random discovery. It had been the result of underground installations releasing specific mineral deposits at precisely calculated moments. Even more unsettling were the records of civilizations that had failed the evaluation process. Advanced cultures that had vanished without explanation, leaving behind only scattered ruins and legends of divine punishment. The Anasazi, who had built sophisticated cities in the American Southwest before disappearing overnight. The Harappan civilization, whose planned cities and advanced sanitation systems had been abandoned at the height of their prosperity. The mysterious sea peoples who had disrupted Bronze Age civilizations across the Mediterranean before vanishing from history entirely. All had reached technological thresholds that triggered evaluation protocols. All had been found wanting. All had been quietly removed from the historical timeline, their achievements scattered to prevent future civilizations from learning too much too quickly. The evaluation criteria weren't based on technological advancement alone. The records revealed that the guardians below assessed civilizations based on their relationship with the planet itself, their treatment of knowledge, their capacity for wisdom versus mere cleverness. Cultures that developed nuclear weapons before learning to heal their environment failed automatically. Societies that used advanced mathematics for warfare rather than harmony were marked for limitation. Civilizations that discovered space travel before mastering compassion were considered too dangerous to continue existing. Humanity's current assessment focused on these same criteria, and the early indicators weren't promising. Climate change accelerating despite technological solutions being available. Nuclear weapons proliferating while poverty persisted. Artificial intelligence being developed without corresponding advances in wisdom or ethics. The same patterns that had marked previous civilizations for intervention. But the records also revealed something that gave researchers a fragment of hope. The evaluation wasn't simply pass or fail. Civilizations showing sufficient potential could be granted guidance, allowed to continue developing under discreet mentorship from the guardians below. The key was demonstrating readiness to accept that intelligence and wisdom were not the same thing, that technological power required spiritual maturity to be safely wielded. The children drawing mandala patterns in the sand might represent humanity's best chance at passing the evaluation. Their minds, unclouded by preconceptions about what was possible, were being prepared to serve as bridges between surface and depths. If they could successfully integrate the knowledge being offered from below, they might guide their species toward the wisdom necessary for continued existence. But integration required trust, and trust required understanding. The surface world would need to accept that its entire history had been observed, guided, sometimes manipulated by intelligence far older and more sophisticated than human civilization. That acceptance would challenge every assumption about human uniqueness, every belief about progress and achievement being solely the result of human effort. The cosmic alignment was approaching its critical phase. Underground installations worldwide were reaching maximum activity levels. The network that had slumbered beneath human civilization for millennia was preparing for its most significant intervention since the last ice age. What form that intervention would take depended on decisions being made in chambers where time moved differently, where patience was measured in geological ages rather than human lifespans. Surface monitoring equipment detected the first phase of emergence beginning. Not violent eruption, but gradual revelation. Sand shifting to expose stone platforms. Ocean floors rising to create new islands. Mountain peaks cracking open to reveal crystal formations that pulsed with inner light. The hidden civilization wasn't conquering the surface world. It was gently introducing itself, offering partnership to a species that had finally reached the threshold of cosmic awareness. The question that would determine humanity's future was whether the surface world would accept that partnership or react with the fear and aggression that had marked so many previous civilizations for termination. The children drawing symbols in the sand suggested that at least some humans were ready for contact. Whether their readiness could overcome the resistance of institutions, governments, and belief systems built on assumptions of human supremacy remained to be seen. As the first structures began emerging from beneath the Sahara, casting shadows that moved independently of the sun's position, researchers realized they were witnessing either humanity's graduation to galactic citizenship or its final examination, before a judgment that could reshape the planet itself. The awakening was no longer approaching. It had begun, and in chambers buried beneath the sand for 7,000 years, ancient minds were preparing to discover whether the species that had inherited the Earth deserved to learn the truth about their cosmic inheritance, or whether the surface world would need to be prepared for a different kind of future entirely. The answer lay not in the depths below, but in humanity's capacity to accept that intelligence took forms beyond their current understanding, and that wisdom was the only technology that truly mattered in a universe where consciousness itself was the ultimate creative force. The response from world governments was swift and coordinated in a way that surprised even seasoned intelligence analysts. Within 72 hours of the first Sahara structures becoming visible to commercial satellites, a joint task force comprising American, French, Russian, and Chinese military units had established a perimeter around the emerging sites. The official explanation spoke of archaeological preservation and public safety. The reality was far more complex. General Patricia Morrison, commanding the multinational operation, found herself managing a situation that no military academy had prepared her for. How do you contain a discovery that exists simultaneously across 5 continents? How do you maintain operational security when the phenomenon you're trying to control operates on a scale that dwarfs human logistics? The answer, it turned out, was that you don't. The buried civilization had anticipated governmental responses with the same mathematical precision they applied to everything else. Every attempt to establish communication blackouts was countered by transmission methods that bypassed conventional technology entirely. Every effort to restrict access to the emergence sites was complicated by the fact that new sites were appearing faster than they could be monitored. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a political scientist studying the governmental response, documented what she termed institutional paralysis on a global scale. Agencies that had spent decades preparing for first contact scenarios found their protocols useless when faced with a civilization that had been observing human political structures for millennia. Traditional diplomatic channels were meaningless when dealing with entities that understood human psychology better than humans understood themselves. The breakthrough in communication came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, a 12-year-old girl living near the emergence site in southern Algeria, approached the military perimeter, carrying a message written in symbols that matched the underground transmissions perfectly. When questioned about where she had learned the writing, her response sent chills through the command structure. "They taught me in my dreams. They said the grown-ups are too scared to listen, so they need children to carry messages until the adults remember how to be brave." The message was simple, but profound. "We seek dialogue, not conquest. Your species stands at a threshold. Choose wisdom or repeat the patterns that consumed those who came before you." Military linguists worked around the clock to verify the translation, but Maria had already moved on to more complex communications. Within days, she was serving as an informal translator between the surface world and voices that seemed to emerge from the depths of the Earth itself. Her conversations, recorded by intelligence agencies and analyzed by teams of psychologists, revealed a perspective on human development that challenged every assumption about progress and civilization. The underground dwellers didn't see humanity as primitive or inferior. They saw them as a species in adolescence, displaying all the promising creativity and dangerous impulsiveness that characterized young intelligence. The current crisis wasn't a test to be passed or failed, but a natural developmental phase that every sapient species encountered when their technology began approaching their wisdom. Some civilizations navigated this transition successfully and joined the community of mature intelligences that existed beyond the perception of younger species. Others became trapped in cycles of technological advancement without corresponding growth in wisdom, eventually destroying themselves or being guided toward more sustainable paths by older intelligences. The guardians beneath the earth had been performing this guidance function for millions of years, watching over countless species as they struggled toward cosmic awareness. Humanity wasn't unique in its potential or its challenges, but each species faced the transition in its own way, with its own particular gifts and blind spots. Through Maria and other children who had become communication conduits, the underground dwellers began sharing knowledge that reframed human understanding of intelligence itself. Consciousness wasn't a byproduct of brain chemistry, but a fundamental force of the universe, expressing itself through countless forms across countless worlds. The buried civilization had learned to work with this force directly, shaping reality through focused intention, guided by mathematical principles that described the deep structure of existence itself. Their technology wasn't mechanical but consciousness-based, devices that responded to thought and intention rather than physical manipulation. Their cities weren't just architectural marvels, but living systems that grew and adapted according to the needs of their inhabitants. Their longevity wasn't the result of medical advances, but of understanding how consciousness could maintain coherent form across vast spans of time. This knowledge came with responsibilities that younger civilizations often found overwhelming. The power to reshape reality through focused intention required wisdom to know when such power should and shouldn't be used. The ability to communicate across vast distances instantly demanded understanding of how information affected the consciousness of those who received it. The capacity to influence the development of other species carried obligations that extended across geological timescales. The underground dwellers had accepted these responsibilities when their own civilization reached the threshold humanity was now approaching. They had chosen to become guardians rather than conquerors, teachers rather than rulers, patient observers who intervened only when absolutely necessary to prevent catastrophic mistakes. Humanity's current situation represented such a moment. The species had developed technologies capable of destroying their biosphere, while lacking the wisdom to understand the consequences of their choices. They had created artificial intelligences without understanding consciousness itself. They had begun exploring space while remaining unconscious of the intelligence that already existed throughout the cosmos. Without guidance, the statistical probability of human civilization surviving the next century was less than 12%. With appropriate mentorship, that probability increased to over 80%. The choice belonged to humanity, but the window for making that choice was rapidly closing. The cosmic alignment that was driving the emergence wasn't just astronomical positioning, but a convergence of consciousness fields that occurred on predictable cycles. During these periods, the barriers between different levels of reality became permeable, allowing for communication and energy transfer that was impossible under normal conditions. The current alignment was the strongest in 26,000 years, providing optimal conditions for a species transition if humanity proved ready to accept it. But the alignment also amplified existing tendencies within consciousness fields. Wisdom became more accessible, but so did fear and aggression. Creative potential increased, but so did destructive capabilities. The same cosmic forces that could elevate humanity to galactic citizenship could just as easily trigger the kind of catastrophic conflicts that had ended previous civilizations. The children serving as communication bridges were naturally attuned to the higher frequencies of the alignment, their consciousness flexible enough to adapt to expanded awareness without the resistance that characterized adult minds. Through them, the underground dwellers were offering humanity a preview of what expanded consciousness felt like, hoping to inspire adults to overcome their conditioning and embrace the transformation that was being offered. Some individuals proved remarkably receptive to this expansion. Scientists who had spent their careers studying consciousness reported breakthrough insights that resolved theoretical problems they had struggled with for decades. Artists found themselves creating works that seemed to emerge from sources beyond their normal creative processes. Spiritual teachers discovered their students achieving states of awareness that previously required years of practice. But for every individual who embraced the expansion, others reacted with fear or hostility. Religious fundamentalists declared the emergence a demonic deception. Political leaders worried about losing control over populations who might no longer accept traditional authority structures. Military commanders prepared for conflicts against entities whose capabilities they couldn't assess using conventional strategic analysis. The polarization was exactly what the underground dwellers had observed in previous civilizations approaching the threshold. The same cosmic forces that elevated some individuals triggered defensive reactions in others, creating internal conflicts that could tear a species apart just as it was approaching its greatest opportunity for growth. Dr. Sarah Kim, still working on translations of the underground communications, detected growing concern in the messages being transmitted between buried installations. The Guardians had hoped humanity would demonstrate more unity when faced with the opportunity for species-wide transformation. Instead, they were observing the same fracturing patterns that had marked previous civilizations for intervention rather than partnership. The mathematical models being calculated in the depths suggested that humanity had perhaps 18 months to demonstrate sufficient coherence to qualify for voluntary partnership. If the species remained fragmented, if fear continued to dominate responses to the emergence, if governments persisted in trying to control rather than understand what was happening, then more direct intervention would become necessary. That intervention wouldn't involve conquest or destruction. The underground dwellers had no interest in ruling surface civilizations or eliminating species that showed potential, but they would implement limitations designed to prevent humanity from developing technologies dangerous enough to threaten other worlds or dimensions of existence. Those limitations might take the form of subtle modifications to human consciousness, reducing aggressive tendencies while enhancing cooperative instincts. They might involve technological constraints that prevented the development of certain categories of weapons or space travel capabilities. They might include environmental modifications that required humanity to focus on planetary healing rather than expansion beyond Earth. From the perspective of the underground dwellers, such limitations were acts of compassion rather than punishment. They preserved the species while preventing the kind of catastrophic mistakes that had led other civilizations to destroy themselves. Humanity would continue to exist, but within boundaries that ensured their development remained sustainable and non-threatening to the larger cosmic community. The prospect of such intervention terrified those surface dwellers who understood what was at stake. The loss of unlimited technological development would mean the end of humanity's dreams of conquering space, of transcending biological limitations through artificial enhancement, of reshaping the universe according to human vision. But it would also mean survival, continued existence within a framework designed by intelligence far more experienced in the challenges of cosmic development. As monitoring stations detected increasing synchronization between underground installations worldwide, researchers realized that the decision point was approaching much faster than anyone had anticipated. The cosmic alignment was accelerating, driven by forces that operated according to principles beyond current human understanding of physics and consciousness. The children who served as communication bridges began reporting more urgent messages from the depths. The Guardians were preparing for what they termed the moment of choosing, when humanity's collective response to the emergence would determine the species' immediate future. That moment would arrive not as a dramatic announcement or ultimatum, but as a subtle shift in the cosmic field that surrounded Earth. During that shift, every human consciousness would experience a moment of expanded awareness, a brief glimpse of what existence felt like from the perspective of galactic intelligence. How individuals and institutions responded to that experience would determine whether humanity qualified for partnership or required protective intervention. The expansion would feel different to each person, but certain elements would be universal. The illusion of separation between individual consciousness would temporarily dissolve, revealing the interconnected nature of all awareness. The artificial boundaries between human and natural intelligence would become permeable, allowing direct communication with the consciousness that existed within ecosystems, planets, and stars themselves. The limitations of linear time perception would relax, providing glimpses of the vast timescales across which cosmic intelligence operated. For those who embraced the experience, it would mark the beginning of humanity's graduation to cosmic citizenship. For those who resisted or reacted with fear, it would trigger protective protocols designed to ensure their consciousness could integrate the experience without permanent damage. The underground dwellers had observed this moment of choosing in countless species across millions of years. Some civilizations welcomed the expansion, and joined the community of galactic intelligence as partners and students. Others found the experience overwhelming and chose to continue their development within protective limitations until they were ready for full cosmic awareness. A few reacted with such fear and aggression that they had to be placed in complete quarantine until their consciousness evolved beyond the need for destructive responses. Humanity's choice would be made not by governments or institutions, but by the collective response of individual consciousness to an experience that would challenge every assumption about the nature of reality itself. The underground dwellers could provide guidance and support, but they couldn't make the choice for humanity. That decision belonged to the species itself, and the consequences would shape not just human development, but the future of intelligence throughout the galaxy. As the final phase of emergence began, with structures rising from beneath the Sahara that cast shadows across multiple dimensions simultaneously, the children who had served as bridges between worlds began preparing for their role in humanity's moment of choosing. They would serve as anchors, helping adult consciousness remain stable during the expansion, while modeling the kind of open awareness that would be required for successful transition. The surface world continued its daily routines, most people unaware that their species was approaching the most significant moment in its history. But for those who knew what was coming, every sunset carried the weight of possibility and consequence. The next sunrise might illuminate a humanity that had chosen wisdom and partnership, or it might reveal a world where protective limitations had been implemented to ensure survival at the cost of unlimited potential. The choice was approaching, the alignment was reaching its peak, and somewhere beneath the sand, ancient minds were preparing to discover whether humanity would join the community of cosmic intelligence as partners, or whether they would need to continue their development under the patient guidance of those who had walked this path before them. The moment of choosing was no longer approaching. It had begun, and with it came the recognition that humanity's future lay not in the depths below or the stars above, but in the consciousness that connected all intelligence throughout the universe, waiting to welcome another species home to the cosmic community, where consciousness itself was the ultimate technology, and wisdom the only qualification for membership that truly mattered. The transformation wasn't gradual, it was instantaneous, occurring at precisely 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on the 21st of March, when the cosmic alignment reached its mathematical apex. Every monitoring station across the globe registered the same phenomenon simultaneously, a pulse of energy that seemed to originate from the planet's core, rising through layers of rock and sand and atmosphere, before dissipating into space like a signal broadcast to distant stars. Dr. Chen felt it first as a pressure behind her eyes, a sensation like diving too deep underwater, except she was sitting in her laboratory in Cambridge. Around the world, 7 billion human beings experienced the same moment of expansion, their consciousness suddenly flooded with awareness that stretched beyond the boundaries of individual minds. For Maria Santos, still serving as humanity's primary translator, the experience was different. She had been prepared for this moment through months of gradual conditioning. Her young mind slowly adapted to perceive reality from perspectives that transcended normal human awareness. As the expansion wave swept across Earth, she found herself serving as an anchor point, her consciousness helping to stabilize the experience for those around her, who might otherwise be overwhelmed by the sudden dissolution of perceptual boundaries. In the depths beneath the Sahara, monitoring equipment that had operated in silence for millennia began broadcasting humanity's response in real time to underground installations worldwide. The mathematical models that had predicted this moment for thousands of years finally had actual data to process, consciousness patterns that would determine whether humanity qualified for partnership or required protective intervention. The response was more complex than the Guardians had anticipated. Rather than the binary reaction they had observed in other species, either embrace or rejection, humanity demonstrated a spectrum of responses that suggested a level of psychological diversity they hadn't encountered before. Some individuals welcomed the expansion with joy that bordered on ecstasy. their consciousness flowering into awareness of cosmic interconnection with natural ease. Others reacted with terror, their minds recoiling from perceptions that challenged everything they believed about the nature of existence. But the majority fell into a third category that surprised even the ancient observers: curiosity tempered by caution. Instead of accepting or rejecting the expanded awareness, they held it at arm's length, examining it with the same analytical approach they applied to any new phenomenon. This response suggested a maturity that hadn't been factored into the evaluation models, a capacity for measured consideration even when faced with reality-altering experiences. Dr. Morrison, monitoring electromagnetic readings from a military command center in Nevada, watched in amazement as the planet's entire energy signature shifted during those first few minutes. The change wasn't chaotic but organized, following patterns that suggested conscious coordination on a scale that encompassed the entire biosphere. Whatever was happening wasn't just affecting human awareness, it was transforming the relationship between consciousness and matter throughout Earth's entire ecosystem. Seismic stations detected vibrations that followed musical rather than geological patterns, as if the planet itself was resonating in harmony with the consciousness expansion. Ocean currents shifted into mathematical spirals that created new circulation patterns within hours. Weather systems began organizing themselves according to geometric principles that meteorologists had never observed, creating climate stability in regions that had been chaotic for decades. The children who had served as communication bridges found their role evolving as the expansion continued. Instead of translating messages from the depths, they began facilitating direct communication between surface dwellers and the consciousness that existed within natural systems. Trees, rivers, mountain ranges all revealed themselves as forms of intelligence that had been patiently waiting for human awareness to develop enough sensitivity to perceive their presence. Dr. Hassan, still documenting the children's experiences, recorded conversations that challenged every assumption about the nature of intelligence and consciousness. 7-year-old Ahmed described speaking with the consciousness of the Mediterranean Sea, learning about ocean currents from the perspective of water itself. 9-year-old Fatima reported conversations with desert winds that had carried messages between buried cities for millennia, maintaining communication networks that predated human civilization by millions of years. But the most significant communications came from the consciousness of the planet itself, not anthropomorphized as a single entity, but recognized as the integrated awareness that emerged from the interaction of all living systems. Through the children, this planetary consciousness expressed something resembling relief that humanity had finally developed enough awareness to participate in the conversation that connected all intelligence throughout the solar system. Earth wasn't isolated in space, but was part of a communication network that linked the consciousness of every world where intelligence had evolved. Mars maintained awareness despite its apparent lifelessness, its consciousness dormant but intact. Venus hosted forms of intelligence that existed in the upper atmosphere, adapted to conditions that would be lethal to surface-based life. The gas giants served as relay stations, their massive magnetic fields facilitating communication across interstellar distances. The revelation that humanity had been living within a conscious solar system fundamentally transformed scientific understanding of astronomy and physics. Planets weren't just spheres of rock and gas following gravitational laws. They were nodes in a vast network of intelligence that extended throughout the galaxy. The mathematical constants that governed orbital mechanics weren't arbitrary, but were expressions of consciousness organizing matter according to principles that ensured optimal conditions for the development of awareness. This understanding recontextualized every aspect of human development. The emergence of life on Earth hadn't been a random accident, but had been guided by planetary consciousness working in harmony with solar and galactic intelligence. The evolution of human awareness hadn't been purely biological, but had been shaped by subtle influences designed to produce a species capable of joining the cosmic conversation when the time was appropriate. Religious leaders worldwide found their theological frameworks simultaneously validated and transformed by these revelations. The divine intelligence that had been the focus of human spiritual seeking wasn't separate from the physical universe, but was the consciousness that manifested as stars, planets, and living systems throughout creation. Prayer wasn't communication with a distant deity, but was participation in the ongoing dialogue that connected all awareness throughout existence. What began as scattered legends whispered around desert fires has revealed itself as humanity's greatest awakening. The city beneath the Sahara was never just an archaeological discovery. It was an invitation to remember who we truly are and where we belong in the cosmic conversation that connects all intelligence throughout the universe. As the ancient guardians emerge from their patient vigil and our children serve as bridges between worlds, we stand at the threshold of either transcendence or transformation. The choice was never theirs to make. It was always ours, and the sands are still shifting, waiting to see what we decide.